Right. We're all cross-eyed, missing half our teeth inbreds because we're gun owners.
Those cross-eyed inbreds are some of the most loving, kindest people you'll ever meet, by the way.
That's right. Just too bad they're cross-eyed because it's hard to shoot straight when you're cross-eyed.
That's true.
Bringing you law, gospel, and guns. Welcome to Armed Lutheran Radio.
Hey, how are you? Welcome to another week of Armed Lutheran Radio. Too much radio voice? Sorry about that. Lloyd Bailey here with you, the Armed Lutheran. Welcome to another episode. This is episode 86. Brought to you by Cook's Holsters, American-made custom Kydex holsters with a lifetime warranty and a 100% satisfaction guarantee. CooksHolsters.com. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you for making Armed Lutheran Radio a part of your week. We are a member of the Self-Defense Radio Network. I encourage you to check them out at selfdefenseradio.net. Check out all the great podcasts that are available in the network. Really great people and informative and entertaining shows. You will enjoy it. Be sure to check it out. Before we get started today, we've got a really good show for you. But before we get started, I wanted to, again, extend my thoughts and prayers to everyone who's suffering in South Texas. We now have the southeastern part of the United States that is looking at the effects of a hurricane bearing down upon them. As I record this, it has not made landfall in the U.S. yet, and there's still some speculation about where it will make landfall, but we've got another area of the U.S. to worry about, and we certainly have everyone in Florida and everyone in the path of Hurricane Irma in our prayers as they prepare for this storm. We've got all this water down here in South Texas and headed our way in the southeastern U.S., but up in the northwest, we've got a lot of people who are dealing with wildfires because there simply isn't enough water. There's not enough rain, and we need to make sure that we don't forget those people and all those who are fighting to save lives and save homes and hold back these terrible wildfires, and all the people who have been affected and had property damaged or have been forced to flee their homes as a result of these fires. So please keep them in your prayers as well. Please donate or volunteer for a reputable disaster relief organization. Your efforts, your help, your donations are badly needed. I recommend LCMS World Relief and their disaster relief fund. I will have a link in the show notes. You can find a link to LCMS World Relief in episode 86's show notes and in the previous 2 weeks, episodes 85 and 84. Made my donation this week, putting my money where my mouth is, so I appreciate if you would do the same. If you make a donation to one of these disaster relief organizations, send me a screenshot of your confirmation showing the amount that you donated and your mailing address, and I will send you some Armed Lutheran swag as a little thank you for donating to help the good people of South Texas and the people who are getting ready to deal with the aftermath of Hurricane Irma when it makes landfall. Like I said, I recommend LCMS World Relief, but there's also the Salvation Army, places like Samaritan's Purse. I won't be sending out thank yous if you gave your money to the Red Cross, because a large percentage of the funds donated to the Red Cross don't actually get to disaster relief. It pays a nearly $2 million salary to the CEO of the Red Cross. If you give to the Red Cross, the NFL has been pushing it. I'm watching the ball games this weekend, and of course everybody's pushing donations to the Red Cross. And if you do that, that's fine. That's your choice. But I'm not going to be, sending you attaboys or any Armed Lutheran swag, if you send me a screenshot of your donation to them, send me your screenshot of your donation to LCMS World Relief or Samaritan's Purse or whatever, a different organization that actually spends a large percentage of the funds that are donated in helping people in need, and I will send you a little thank you package, a little swag for your efforts. I really do appreciate it. Want to mention before we get started, we are putting the final touches on something that I mentioned, I guess it's been about a month ago now. We're talking about putting together a training class featuring two of Armed Lutheran Radio's contributors, Aaron Israel and Sergeant Bill Silvia. We're calling it Combat and Competition. It's going to be 4 hours of basically a half day of training with Aaron Israel, sort of a condensed version or a curriculum based on the combat-focused shooting course from Rob Pincus that Aaron teaches, and a half day of competition handgun training with Sergeant Bill Silvia. The plan right now, we're trying to finalize everything with the range, but the plan is to hold that on November 18th. The registration fee will be $200, and we'll have a promo code for you as well when that is up and running. I'll provide a link at a later date, probably in next week's episode if we can get that ironed out by next week. And I'll have a place for you to log in and register and reserve your spot. What's coming up today? We've got tips from Aaron. We've got tips from Sergeant Bill. Mia and Pastor Bennett are unable to be with us this week. Lord willing, they'll be back with us next week. I'm flying solo on Clinging to God and Guns, looking at an article written in the aftermath of the Newtown massacre and written by a Texas Baptist who favors very strict gun control, oddly enough. Stick around. We've got a quick break coming up, and then we'll be back with all of that. You're listening to Armed Lutheran Radio right here on the Self-Defense Radio Network.
It's the Bill of Rights, not the Bill of Needs. I'm Alan Gottlieb, founder of the Second Amendment Foundation. When someone says we don't need that kind of gun, remind them the Founding Fathers determined what rights our Constitution should protect. There's a world of difference between rights and needs. It is not the function of government to tell us what we need or what we don't. Certainly no one needs an assault rifle or a Saturday night special, or for that matter, no one needs a Corvette with a high-capacity horsepower engine capable of speeds to 150 miles per hour. But in the hands of honest, responsible individuals, we have the right of choice. We have the right to read books others don't like. We have the right to listen to any radio program we choose. We have the right to dress the way we want to. We also have the right to own firearms of our choice. So the next time someone tells you, you don't need something, tell them it's the Bill of Rights, not the Bill of Needs. Join the Second Amendment Foundation today so that this message and our Bill of Rights might live. Call 425-454-7012. That's 425-454-7012.
It's time for this week's self-defense tip from Aaron Israel of Fundamental Defense.
Hey folks, this is Aaron Israel with Fundamental Defense here with your personal defense tip of the week. This week I want to talk to you about doing simple things before you think about the difficult and expensive things as it relates to home defense and defending your property. I've had a rash of burglaries in my neighborhood, people breaking into cars, and a lot of the people in my neighborhood, most of them have sophisticated camera systems, most of them are gun owners, most of them ostensibly take personal defense very seriously and take home defense very seriously. But the problem is that all the burglars that broke into people's trucks simply walked up and tested the door, and if the door opened, they went in and took things out of the consoles. So the very simple act of closing and locking your door and making sure that it's locked when you go in your house just by hitting the little clicker and listening for the beep when the horn honks is a simple step that a lot of people forgot to take. And so even though they had their security cameras pointed at their truck, all they were able to do, of course, was get a picture of the guy who took the things out of their truck, and luckily we were able to get a license plate. So I'm not saying don't have security cameras. I'm just saying if you got all the sophisticated home defense equipment and surveillance equipment, it doesn't do you much good if you don't do things simply like locking your truck doors before you go in the house and checking to make sure they're locked before you go to bed. Simple mistake that a lot of people can make, and I think it's the simple things where we get ourselves caught with our pants down a lot. If you don't lock your doors, then it doesn't matter if you got an alarm on them. It's going to make it real easy for somebody to come walking in and do what they want to do if you're away from the house, hopefully, or God forbid you happen to be there and it turns into a home invasion. So do the simple things. One of the simple things that you can do that I saw a good article on earlier this week is design your landscaping in such a way that it controls how people access your lawn. Now, I've got a very open front landscaping. It's HOA mandated that we can only have certain kinds of bushes and trees, and so you may be facing similar restrictions. But if you do have an open concept landscaping, if you can see all the way to the street and you don't have bushes blocking your windows, that's a good thing. If you have a peephole that you can look through and you can see all the way out to the street through your peephole, that's something you might want to look into. If you want to get sophisticated camera systems like I talked about that allow you to see all the way to the street, that makes it even easier. They've got very simple and inexpensive things like the Ring door camera that you can get for your doorbell. I've got one of those that's really helpful, so you can screen who it is coming to your door, which you shouldn't be answering your door to people you aren't expecting anyway, and that allows you to talk to them right there through the camera, even when you're not at the house, through the internet. And so those are things that you can do, and if you do have a less restrictive, if you don't live in an HOA and you can do more things to your lawn, setting up your bushes in such a way that it funnels people into one area where they can't come sneaking around the side. If you set up like a hedge-type fence, basically using bushes and shrubbery with thorns and things like that around your windows, and then outside of your walkway, outside of your yard is a kind of a natural fence, then that funnels people into where you want to be able to see them. So you want to be able to see them coming. If you have your landscaping set up in such a way that people are able to sneak up to your house without you ever seeing them, then that's a problem. So think about the simple stuff. Lock your doors, look at your landscaping, and see how that design funnels people or doesn't funnel people toward your house, and make adjustments as necessary. And think about little simple things like the doorbell camera. And if you can do those simple things, starting with locking your doors, then you're going to prevent a lot of these crimes of opportunity, which burglars are lazy. They look for opportunities, and most times they're not going to do the thing that's harder. The guy didn't make any attempt. If the door didn't open, this guy that was burglarizing cars in our neighborhood moved on. He didn't make any attempt to smash any windows, get out any crowbars. He was looking for targets of opportunity. So don't be a target of opportunity. Do the simple stuff, or the sophisticated stuff isn't going to help you too much. That's your personal defense tip of the week. Thanks for tuning in.
Aaron Israel is a Personal Defense Network contributor and owner of Fundamental Defense. You can find out more and sign up for any of Aaron's classes at fundamentaldefense.com.
The percentage of women who own guns is growing. American women are more knowledgeable and better equipped to defend themselves than ever before. So, why is it that every time I go to a gun shop, I feel like they're talking down to me? Like, hey little lady, let me show you what you need. It's like all they want to do is sell me a pink gun. If you're tired of feeling that too, visit Guns for Gals, a specialty firearms boutique designed to empower women with information about firearm safety and to equip them with the means to protect themselves. The owners go out of their way to find products specifically for women, and they actually listen and ask questions to help you find the right products to meet your needs. If they wouldn't own it themselves, they won't sell it. Guns for Gals is located at 2035 Central Circle, Suite 108 in McKinney, Texas. Open Monday 1 to 6 and Tuesday through Thursday 11 to 7. And on weekends, you can find them at a gun show near you. Or shop online at www.gunsforgals.com. Guns for Gals, more than just a gun shop. It's how gun shopping should be.
For the reloaders in the audience, have you ever ordered reloading supplies online? Well, if so, who do you call when you need help, or if you need something special? Will they give you a price that includes hazmat and shipping? Will they promise to beat their competitors' prices, including shipping? And when you call, do you talk to a customer service rep, or can you talk to the owner himself? Well, if you'd prefer a personal touch and great customer service, talk to my friend Jim Swindle at U.S. Reloading Supply. It's a family-owned business that focuses on helping shooters dealers get all the components they need at the very best prices. They carry all the name brands. If you've got a special order or large quantities, ask them for a quote and they will help you find what you need at a great price. Use the promo code Lutheran2017 and save 10% off your order and get free shipping on orders over $50. Check them out online at usreloadingsupply.com or call them today, 941-451-7357. US Reloading Supply. Tell them the Armed Lutheran sent you.
Time now for another Ballistic Minute with Sergeant Bill Silvia.
Hey, I'm Sergeant Bill. This is your Ballistic Minute. So I got asked the other day, what do I do when I do a live fire range session, practice session? So basically what I do is, there's a little variation to it, but this is the basic framework. So I get to the range, I get all my stuff set up, and then I don't use more than 2 or 3 targets max. I'll set up some target, maybe like a dot drill or just some dots, and I'll shoot it, 3, 4, 5 yards, just for sort of a warm-up to, get my hands gripping the gun and get used to the recoil again, and just to warm up and shoot a little bit. Just shooting some groups at medium speed, nothing too fast, but not too slow either. Then I like to do 1 or 2 drills for whatever it is I'm working on for that range session, whether it be coming into position and shooting, or transitions, or transitioning from a close target to a far target. I've been working on that one a lot lately because that one's difficult. So I'll do a drill and then maybe a second drill that works on whatever specific task I'm working on. Now, I also, shooting Glocks, I have about 10 to 12 magazines that I'll take to the range with me, and I'll load them all up. I don't have anything different from practice mags to match mags. They're all the same thing pretty much, and I just load them up and shoot them. I also try to pick drills that are not really ammo intensive, because I'm making my own ammo and I don't have any sponsors throwing me tons of ammo to practice all the time. So I want to be as efficient with the use of my practice ammo as I can. Typically, the drills that I'll run will be no more than 6 rounds. So I can take a regular Glock magazine, Glock 17 magazine, and I can do 12 rounds in it and have 2 runs at whatever drill I'm doing per magazine. If I have 10 magazines, that's going to give me 20 practice runs before I need to go reload, and that's pretty good. While I'm reloading my mags, I can think about what I was doing, what I wasn't doing well, what I wasn't doing, what I need to do better, and try and work on it. It's practice. That's what you're doing. I also like to use just regular masking tape. The brown masking tape is about the same color as the cardboard targets that I use, and just tape them up real quick. I actually don't tape up anything that's inside the down zeros, only the outside the down zeros, because those are the ones that I'm concerned about. So there's a lot less taping to do that way as well. So if I shoot 20 shots and 5 of them are outside the down zero, well, I only have 5 holes to tape instead of all 20. The last thing I'll do is I like to work on a accuracy and some sort of confidence building drill. So even if it's just a slow fire, group shooting at whatever distance, or even if it's shooting steel at a longer distance, I want to do it so that when I leave the range, dog noise, it's not just Steve Anderson that has it. So when I leave the range, my confidence level are as high as they can be. I don't want to be screwing around on a drill and having issues and then, walk off the range with my head down thinking, oh man, I'm horrible, I suck. I want to do something just before I leave, usually some sort of accuracy drill, so that the last thing I do is confidence building, like I said, so that I'm feeling good about what I'm doing and how I'm doing it, and I'm raring to get back into dry fire and come back to live fire range when I get a chance. I know it sounds kind of simple, but you can easily burn through 2, 3, 4, even 500 rounds pretty quickly. I know I like to try and keep my live fire range sessions at about 200 rounds, maybe 300 rounds. That way I'm not just burning ammo, I'm actually getting some productive training in. Now the big caveat is this is a actual practice range, not a square range where I rent a bay and I can move and shoot and draw and shoot as fast as I want as long as they're not going over the berm. If you don't have access to something like that, it's really hard to get that kind of practice in for practical pistol shooting. But if you look around, ask guys you shoot with at an IDPA match or a USPSA match, they probably know somebody that has a small range with a practice facility where you can get a membership and you can practice like that, practice the way you'd shoot, even if it's just for defensive skills. Defensive skills are not picking your gun up off the table and shooting 1 round per second like at most of the square ranges. So if you just look around, you might have to drive a little bit. I mean, I don't live in town, but I still drive a half hour to my range each direction, so ask around. I'm Sergeant Bill. This has been your Ballistic Minute, and that's how I go to the live fire range and train.
Sergeant Bill Silvia is a 15-year veteran of the Dallas Police Department and masterclass competitive shooter. You can watch Sergeant Bill's shooting videos at armedlutheran.us/Sergeant Bill.
Having a good holster is absolutely critical if you're going to carry a firearm for self-defense. If you need a quality holster, let me recommend Cook's Holsters. I've found Cook's Holsters when I bought an IWB holster to write a review. I liked that holster from Cook's Holsters so much that I applied to become an official Cook's Holsters dealer. Cook's Holsters are American-made, custom-molded to fit your firearm. The advantage of Kydex is that it holds its shape. It doesn't lose retention. It won't wear on the finish of your firearm the way leather will. They're available for hundreds of gun models, dozens of color combinations and different printed patterns. They're great for concealed carry, for range work. They come with a lifetime warranty against defects and a 100% satisfaction guarantee. Check them out today, www.cooksholsters.com. Use the promo code ARMEDPODCAST to save 10% off of your order and make sure you've got a quality holster. Go to cooksholsters.com today.
Up next, we're clinging to God and guns with Pastor John Bennett.
Welcome back. Time now for Clinging to God and Guns, where we examine and debunk articles, interviews, and videos that try to use Scripture to make a political point in the gun rights debate. Joining us normally would be our good friend Pastor John Bennett, the pastor of St. John's Lutheran Church in Willow Creek, Minnesota. Pastor Bennett couldn't join us this week, so I'm flying solo. When you talk about Baptists, you typically think conservative, pro-life, traditional marriage, generally on the right side of the spectrum politically. And when you're talking Texas Baptists, obviously, you would think even more so. I mean, everything's bigger in Texas, right? Well, it turns out that that's not exactly the case, and there are some who have very liberal social views, and we've got an article from one of those kinds of Baptists here today. It's a blog post from the website of the Baptist General Convention of Texas, published back in 2012 following the Newtown school shooting. Their website uses the word transformational a lot. If you want to know what this group is all about, they're all about creating transformational churches and transforming people. And here's a sample of just from their mission statement on their website. We are a fellowship of transformational churches, sacrificially giving ourselves to God's redemptive purpose, continually being transformed by the power of the Holy Spirit into the likeness of Christ. That's a theme that we heard from that cult leader, Uncle Doug, back in episode 84. We join together to transform our communities and the world. So they use the word transform or transformational 3 times in 2 sentences. They're big on transformation. They're just transforming all the time. It's the Church of Optimus Prime.
We are autonomous robotic organisms from the planet Cybertron.
This post comes to us from someone named Farrell Foster, who I found out is the Director of Ethics and Justice for the Christian Life Commission at the Baptist General Convention of Texas. From what I gather from his social media posts. He loves him some unvetted, undocumented refugees. He's opposed to the Muslim ban or building a wall, or he's all for illegal immigration. He hates the fact that Trump overturned DACA. He approvingly retweets things from frauds like Elizabeth Warren and Chris Murphy. He's a big supporter of the so-called March for Science, and he's bought hook, line, and sinker into the fraud and the hoax that is global warming, retweeting pictures of polar bears and stories about how they're dying when they're not, and melting ice caps when they're actually expanding. He even once wrote that President Barack Obama was a man of exceptional character, and I almost spit out my coffee when I read that. So you get the idea that, you know, what we're dealing with here. We're dealing with a leftist social justice Christian. So here we go. Are you ready for this? He starts out with a reference to President Barack Obama, then President Obama, and a speech that he made following Newtown. Our president, again, that would be President Obama, has asked us some straightforward questions. And I'm going to play that clip from that speech.
Can we truly say, as a nation, that we're meeting our obligations? Can we honestly say that we're doing enough to keep our children, all of them, safe from harm? Can we claim as a nation that we're all together there, letting them know that they're loved and teaching them to love in return? Can we say that we're truly doing enough to give all the children of this country the chance they deserve to live out their lives in happiness and with purpose?
President Obama asked those questions Sunday night in Newtown, Connecticut, after the latest explosion of gun violence. He answered his questions with an honest no. Now, right off the bat, let's make a couple of observations. No, we're not doing enough to prevent mentally unstable losers from killing their parents and stealing their guns and shooting up schools. And by that I mean none of our laws that we currently have on the books prevented that. And nothing, let's keep in mind, nothing that was proposed in the aftermath of Newtown and nothing that you'll hear in this article would have stopped it either. The only thing you could do is preemptively lock up all the socially maladjusted losers, enact some sort of compulsory incarceration of everybody with mental illness, or ban and confiscate every gun in private hands. That's the only way to do it. It's the only way to prevent another Newtown. And then you still couldn't necessarily prevent it because bad people are still going to do bad things, like what happened in Newtown, despite what the laws are. I'm an owner of multiple guns, he says. I live in the country, and we use guns for hunting and to kill animals that cause problems, like hogs, coyotes, and skunks, the latter in my backyard. We occasionally use the shotguns to shoot clay quote-unquote pigeons. I even had to pull my shotgun on a man who was up to no good on the edge of our property late one night. That's interesting because, and I normally would just go on to the next paragraph, but we got a guy here who is going to lecture us about Americans and our guns, but he pulled a shotgun on somebody on the edge of his property. Okay? Not in his yard, not in his driveway, not in his house, on the edge of his property. Okay? Guns are part of life in the country, but I don't have an assault rifle or a large clip firearm. I don't even have a semi-automatic. You don't need them to hunt or to protect yourself. The most shells any of my guns will hold are 5. If you can't do your business with that many shells, then the animal should have the right to go free. Well, see, this is the same kind of idiot nonsense that people who don't know anything about guns and try to claim that they do, it's the kind of crap that they say. You don't need a semi-automatic to defend yourself. You don't need. If you need more than 5 shots to hunt with, you're a bad hunter, that kind of stuff. We've heard that argument before. It's straight out of Bloomberg. It's idiot talk. And as our friend Alan Gottlieb at the Second Amendment Foundation says, and if you've heard it earlier in the spot on the show, it's the Bill of Rights, not the Bill of Needs, right? Just because you don't see the need for something doesn't mean you get to ban or restrict them. For example, I don't see the need for a motorcycle, for instance. They can be very dangerous. I mean, especially for those who are riding them, because people don't see them and hit them a lot of times. But I would never in a million years suggest that we should ban or restrict them to keep people safe. Hearkening back to that Second Amendment Foundation ad, I don't see a need for a car capable of speeds over 100 miles an hour either, especially when the speed limit is at best 75. And let's face it, speed kills. You combine speed with other distracted driving or inexperienced drivers or whatever, and it can be fatal. But I would never suggest in a million years that you shouldn't own one or that we should ban or restrict them. So what? You only need 5 rounds for self-defense. Okay, fine. So if more than one person assaults you, attacks you, breaks into your home, and you can't stop them all with 5 shots, well, I guess those animals just have the right to kill and rape you, right? Our Constitution gives us the right to bear arms. At least it gives our militias the right, but the writers of our Constitution knew nothing of the sophisticated weapons that are now available. Well, let's address the militia thing first, of course. We're all the militia, including Mr. Foster, with his 5-shot shotgun. A well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms, shall not be infringed. If we're going to have a militia in a time of an emergency, a need to supplement the National Army in times of invasion, for example, or to defend the homeland when we've sent the army off to war, you want the members of the militia to be sufficiently skilled so that you're not handing a bunch of doofuses guns to wander around with. I mean, I know people like Mr. Foster are concerned about the average Joe just walking around with a gun, right? The average guy with no training. Well, that's what this is about. If you want to have people who are going to be useful if and when we need to call up the militia, people have to have some proficiency with guns. That's what this is about. And that militia is all of us. And yes, the founders did, in fact, foresee more lethal, more efficient firearms. Multi-shot firearms had already been designed by the time that the Constitution was written. They weren't in mass production, but they were known to the founders. And it's insulting and ignorant to suggest that the founders were such simpletons that they could never have foreseen the advance of technology. But what does that say about the First Amendment? They could never have seen computers or smartphones or blogging, but here we have Farrell Foster writing this insipid blather on the interwebs. But I digress. All right, back to the article. Quite frankly, there are only 4 reasons I can think of to have a large clip semi-automatic firearm. And I'm just saying large clip because this guy doesn't know crap from Shinola about guns. So this is the term that he's using. All right, so here are the four reasons that he can think of to have a large clip semi-automatic firearm. 1, to play with. 2, to defend yourself against violence. 3, to defend yourself against a rogue government. Or 4, to kill a bunch of innocent people. Now note that Mr. Foster completely contradicted himself in this sentence. He says you don't need a large clip semi-automatic firearm to defend yourself. Then 3-4 sentences later, he says that defense against violence is one of the 4 reasons to own a large clip semi-automatic firearm. Guns are fun, and some of them are much more cool than others, said Philip Van Cleve, head of the Virginia Citizens Defense League. Now, Philip Van Cleve, the Citizens, for those of you who don't remember, the Virginia Citizens Defense League is the group of pro-Second Amendment advocates that Katie Couric set up with her documentary about gun violence. Remember, she brought in a group from VCDL and had them sit down for an interview, and they were rolling tape at the beginning of the interview, and they had nothing to do. They're just sitting around waiting. And she asked them a tough question about gun control, which they had an immediate answer to, but they edited the video and took footage of them sitting around staring at the floor and the ceiling and each other and put it in there to make it look like they had no answer for Katie's brilliant question. So back to Mr. Van Cleve's quote, "It's just like we have television sets that look cool and others are much more boxy," end quote. And then Mr. Foster says, televisions don't kill people. Gun fun is not worth the cost of innocent lives. So my thought, my reaction to this is, my guns haven't killed anyone. They have not taken any innocent lives. Hopefully, they never will. Hopefully, Mr. Foster's 5-shot shotgun never will either. My owning an AR-15 or a semi-automatic firearm doesn't cost anyone their lives unless I make the decision to do something evil. And see, that's the difference. Why didn't Mr. Foster shoot that guy who was up to no good on the edge of his property that night? It had nothing to do with the fact that he only had 5 shells in the shotgun. It had nothing to do with the fact that the firearm that he was carrying was not semi-automatic. It had to do with the fact that, I don't know the circumstances here, but he didn't just go out and shoot the guy. And it's because he's not a bad person. It's the person holding the firearm that matters, not the capacity of the firearm, and not whether it can automatically load another shell after you pull the trigger. It doesn't make a difference. This focusing on the gun itself as a talisman of evil instead of focusing on the person holding the gun is just, it's so illogical. It's like saying that swimming pool fun is not worth the cost of innocent lives, or baseball fun, right, is not worth the cost of innocent lives, because more people die from drowning than are killed by guns every year, and more people are beaten to death with blunt objects, including your hands and fist. Actually, more people die from being punched and kicked than are killed with these mythical assault rifles that Mr. Foster is so opposed to. It gets down to the argument that just because something, and Pastor Bennett has pointed this out in previous episodes, just because something has the capability to be used for evil doesn't mean that it is evil in itself. Just because it has the capability to kill doesn't mean that you should ban it. Because my car has the capability to kill. My knives in the kitchen have the capability to kill. Some of them are very, very sharp and quite long. The problem is in the heart of the killer. It's the sin and the wickedness in the heart of man. That's the problem. And I don't recall God ever saying rock fun isn't worth the cost of Abel's life. That's a different story. Almost for the rest of the article, I can't make it with a single sentence without having to stop because something he says is insane. His next sentence, regarding defending oneself, a small clip firearm can more than do the trick if you're inclined that way. Thank you, Captain Obvious. It's true. Millions of Americans carry reduced capacity firearms for self-defense, guns like the M&P Shield, the Glock 43, the Walther PPS, the Snubby revolver that I'm currently carrying. People have been carrying these small guns, and they serve people very well. But that argument is like saying, regarding road travel, a moped will more than do the trick if you're inclined that way. But maybe some people would prefer to have options. Maybe some people would prefer to have a high-capacity car or a car that can go really fast. And just because the moped will do the trick, that doesn't mean that the SUV or the Maserati should be banned. And if I must deal with the third point, and the third point was defending yourself against a rogue government, as you remember a moment ago when he was listing out the 4 reasons to have a large clip semi-automatic firearm. If I must deal with the third point, a semi-automatic rifle is not going to stop a rogue government. Perceived protection from some perceived threat is not worth the cost of innocent lives. Okay, protection against tyranny is exactly why the Second Amendment was written. So it's not about self-defense, it's not about hunting, it's about defense against tyranny, and it's about being prepared to serve in the militia should the government need your assistance. So maybe we should read the founders instead of just blathering like this. I guess he's saying, well, the government starts rounding people up and sending them off in boxcars, then there's nothing you can do because that semi-automatic rifle just isn't enough. Go watch the movie Red Dawn. It's all I can say. I'm not even going to go any further than that. That just, it assumes that the American government could convince the American people to turn against their brothers and sisters, their homes and their families. The supposition that people are just going to willingly sit back and watch as their family members are rounded up and arrested or killed in a civil war against a tyrannical government is a bit of a stretch. Perceived protection against some perceived threat. That's one of the dumbest, most sophomoric sentences I've ever read. Tell that to Carol Bown. The perceived threat that Carol Bown wanted perceived protection from walked up and gutted her in her front yard because namby-pamby, hand-wringing liberals like this guy wouldn't let her exercise her natural right to self-defense. That leaves only the fourth reason, says Mr. Foster. The very few people who want to use large clip semi-automatics in this way, that is, to kill lots of innocent people, do not have the political clout to stop the passage of saner laws. That's actually the stupidest thing I've ever read. I don't even know what he's trying to argue here. Is he trying to suggest by inference that the people who are opposing gun laws, saner quote-unquote gun laws, and that's another phrase that you'll hear him use over and over, that the only people who would oppose saner gun laws are people who want to kill a bunch of innocent people? The tiny fraction of people who want to kill lots of people with guns, with large clip semi-automatics, as he calls them, are typically felons, typically the kinds of people who are not allowed to have guns anyway. They're either minors, or they're mentally ill, or they're prohibited persons because they have a criminal record, or they're terrorists or whatever, or they're violent Democrats like that guy who went to the baseball field and shot up the Republican baseball practice. They're also the kind of people who don't obey your saner laws. They don't obey the ones that we already have. Let's look back at Newtown, like we were talking about earlier. Killing your parent. Okay? That's what the shooter did to acquire his firearms. He killed his mother. That's generally frowned upon in society. There's already a law against that. Stealing her guns. Theft. Already illegal. Taking a gun onto school property. Illegal. Breaking into a school. Also illegal. Shooting people at the school. Most definitely illegal. So what am I missing here? What sane law would have prevented that? Because the sane laws that we already have didn't stop Newtown. Back to our author. You can be a strong supporter of the Second Amendment, which grants the right to bear arms, and still be a reasonable citizen who supports restrictions on highly dangerous weapons and on the number of weapons that can be purchased in a given time. No, you can't. Just like you can't be a supporter of the First Amendment and still support restrictions on religious freedom, or the right to worship, or the right to assemble, or the right to speak openly about your religious beliefs, the right to protest, or to rally, or to speak out. You can't say that you support the First Amendment while supporting restrictions on it. The I support the Second Amendment but argument is it's bogus. You can't say that you support the Second Amendment and at the same time support limits just because some lefty bedwetter is scared of how many bullets they hold or how fast they can shoot or whatever. But honestly, says our author, any American could say the above. We Christians should care even more than the ordinary Joe. Jesus spoke clearly against violence. So we've gone through half the article without a single reference to Scripture. We finally get to this. So instead of making the argument from the beginning from Scripture, it's all been his bad logic and the anti-gun political message. We Christians should care even more than the ordinary Joe. Jesus spoke clearly against violence. But I say to you, do not resist an evildoer. But if anyone strikes you on the cheek, turn the other also. That from Matthew 5:39. All right, we've dealt with this a number of times. We dealt with this a little bit last week. Turning the other cheek has to do with this idea of vengeance, not repaying evil for evil, leaving vengeance to the Lord. And Luther makes some distinctions about this in his writings on the Sermon on the Mount. This is from the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5. So if you look at volume 21 of Luther's works, but still Christ says here in plain words, do not resist evil. It sounds obvious that this is being absolutely forbidden. Answer, yes, but pay attention to whom he is saying this. He is not saying no one should ever resist evil, for that would completely undermine all rule and authority. But this is what he is saying, you shall not do it. Now who are you? They are the disciples of Christ, whom he is teaching about their personal lives apart from the secular government. As we have said often enough, being a Christian is something quite different from holding and administering a secular office or position. Therefore, he intends to say, leave the resistance of evil, the administration of justice, and the punishment to the one who holds a position in the secular realm, as the lawyers and the laws instruct you to do. But to you, my disciples, whom I am not teaching about ruling outwardly, but about living before God, I say, you shall not resist evil. Now that sounds like Luther is agreeing with our author here, that we should just take whatever comes our way. If you are wronged, the Bible makes it very clear, Jesus makes it very clear, that you're not to avenge yourself. You're not to go out and looking for the guy who wronged you and to take him out. If he successfully breaks into your home, assaults you, and then grabs some stuff and runs away, you don't have a right to kill him as he's running away. You don't have the right to say, I'm going to take revenge on this guy, to track him down, to kill him, or to punish him yourself. That's not your position. We talked last week a little about the idea of vocation, that we have God-given vocations, and those vocations have certain responsibilities, that your vocation as parent is to protect your life and the life of your wife, the life of your children, to protect your neighbor from grave bodily harm. As Luther says, this distinction enables us to take up this text and to apply each of its parts. A Christian should not resist any evil, but within the limits of his office, a secular person should oppose every evil. Now, we talked last week about the two kingdoms doctrine, the idea that we are members of both the kingdom of the left and the kingdom of the right, the kingdom of this world and the kingdom of the gospel, that as Christians we should not in our hearts desire to harm our neighbors. We should not in our hearts desire to take revenge against our neighbors. But at the same time, we have obligations in the kingdom of the world as a secular person to stand up to evil. And if that evil comes knocking on your door threatening to kill you and your family, you have every right to defend yourself against it. It doesn't mean open the door and let them do what they will. It doesn't mean lie down and take it because you're a Christian. As Luther says, and this is again in his exposition on the Sermon on the Mount, there is no getting around it. A Christian has to be a secular person of some sort. As regards his own person, according to his life as a Christian, he's in subject to no one but Christ. But at least outwardly, according to his body and property, he is related by subjection and obligation to the emperor, that is the government, the secular world, inasmuch as he occupies some office or station in life, or has a house and home, a wife and children. So we're not just talking about your job as a soldier or a policeman. If you own a home, if you have a wife, if you have children, you have an obligation, you have a vocation that requires you to protect them. According to your own person, you're a Christian, says Luther. But in relation to your servant, you're a different person. You're obliged to protect him. Now we are talking about a Christian in relation. Not about his being a Christian, but about this life and his obligation in it to some other person whom he is obliged, if possible, to defend, guard, and protect. It would be a mistake to teach, turn the other cheek, and throw your cloak away with your coat. That would be ridiculous, says Luther. Like the case of the crazy saint who let the lice nibble at him and refused to kill any of them on account of this text, maintaining that he had to suffer and could not resist evil. So what Luther is pointing out here is it's ridiculous for us to take this turn the other cheek text and say, let the bad people do whatever they want to you. Now, if the bad person does something bad to you, you don't then take revenge upon them. You don't go out and gun them down in the street. You don't shoot them as they're running away. All right. Even more importantly, says our author, Mr. Foster, Jesus spoke of the value of every individual soul. Quote, "Are not 5 sparrows sold for 2 pennies? Yet not one of them is forgotten in God's sight, but even the hairs of your head are all counted. Do not be afraid. You are of more value than many sparrows." That from Luke 12. Yes, and this is why we're called to defend life against evil. Every life is precious. As we said last week, we shouldn't wish to harm the person who comes to do us wrong. The guy who's breaking down your door to break into your house at night, we shouldn't desire to kill that person. We shouldn't desire to harm them. If harm comes to them as a result of their evil, that's on them. Every life is precious. But I'm not going to say that the life of the guy on the other side of the door is so precious that I'm going to let him kill me and my family. because my family's lives are precious and I have an obligation because God has entrusted those lives to me. If he succeeds in stealing your stuff, if he succeeds in assaulting you, even if he succeeds in killing some member of your family, it's not your vocation then to seek to avenge their lives. Leave that to the government. Leave that to the authorities. Can you imagine Jesus owning a gun if he lived in a U.S. city today? No way. And even if he lived in the country, I suspect he might find less deadly ways to deal with nuisance animals, although hogs would present him with a serious challenge. My guess is he'd banish demons into them and they'd jump off a cliff, but, I can't imagine Jesus owning a gun, and we talked about this previously. No, we can't imagine him owning a gun or a sword. That wasn't his mission. His mission was to come and to die for our sins and not to resist being arrested. The reason he didn't resist was not to prove how nonviolent he is and set an example for all of us, because we're not Christ. As much as you want to talk about this transforming yourself into the image of Christ crap, that's not possible. We lost the image of Christ in the fall. We are wicked and sinful from birth. There's no way to regain, on this side of heaven, there's no way for us to regain that image. No matter how much transforming you're going to do, it doesn't work that way. All your works are for naught. They don't make you more righteous, and they don't make you more Christ-like. We're not transformed. We're not Jesus, and we never will be. That's the big difference. Jesus is God. He came here and he took on our human flesh to die for our sins, even the sins that we haven't committed yet, so that we could have eternal salvation, eternal life. We're not Christ. If I die today, nobody's soul is saved as a result if I sacrifice myself. Back to our author. If Christian gun owners alone would stand up and petition our elected officials for saner gun laws, then we could make needed change. Our president said, and this was President Obama again,
we're not doing enough. And we will have to change. Since I've been president, this is the fourth time we have come together to comfort a grieving community torn apart by mass shooting. Fourth time we've hugged survivors. The fourth time we've consoled the families of victims. We can't tolerate this anymore. These tragedies must end. And to end them, we must change.
Dealing with gun laws, says our author, is only part of the solution. But Christian gun owners should be leading the effort to make our laws more restrictive. He can use the word saner laws and talk about sane laws, but this is insane. His idea of saner laws is banning standard capacity magazines, banning semi-automatic firearms, and background checks. In other words, what he's saying here is if we Christian gun owners would just lay our guns down and demand that the government come and restrict our freedoms, if we would just stand up and demand that we law-abiding citizens be disarmed by the government, then we'd all be safe from the criminals. No, and that's so freaking stupid, I can't even stand it. I read an article the other day, and this is a novel idea, maybe, and we hear this argument a lot. Maybe we should just try to enforce the laws that we already have. I read an article from Singapore talking about Singapore's gun laws. Now, they don't have gun violence much in Singapore, but they do have gun ownership. And the reason that they don't have much gun violence is because if you commit a crime with a gun, even if you don't fire the gun, even if no one is hurt, they have very strict gun laws. I don't agree with the idea of licensing, but they do have private gun ownership. And they say, look, if you misuse the privilege that we're giving you, in their country it's a privilege, here it's a right. If you abuse that privilege, then we're going to punish you harshly. And they tack on extra years to your sentences for lower offenses. If you shoot somebody in committing a crime with a gun, guess what? You're going to the gallows. Even very minor gun crimes. If you are in possession of a firearm that you're not allowed to have, if you're a prohibited person for whatever reason under their law, or you don't have a license for the firearm that you're found to be possessing, you get 5 years in prison. And the guy that they quoted in that article said, the difference between us and the U.S. is we enforce our laws. We prosecute in this country a tiny fraction of gun violations by felons. And when we do prosecute them, they get very light sentences. I saw a a letter to the editor the other day, a couple of days ago. I want to say it was in Pennsylvania, where two different people who had committed firearms violations, who had used firearms in commission of a crime, got very, very light sentences. And the guy was complaining, why aren't we upholding our laws? This person got 6 months, home confinement, and another person got a deferred sentence. Why can't we uphold the law instead of trying to create new ones and make criminals out of lots of people who are doing no harm? That wouldn't be sane to do, I guess. Freedom, in an earthly sense, is never total, and it must always have limits in order to make possible a civil society of people with competing values and interests. The voices of murdered children cry out from their graves for us to change our gun laws before more innocent souls join them. Before I get to the last two sentences, I got to respond to this. He's right that we have to have laws, that there has to be order in a civil society. He's correct about that. But then he goes from that and makes a meaningless emotional argument suggesting that the children who are murdered crying out from their graves for us to change our laws. This is a meaningless argument. This is an emotional argument that doesn't carry any weight. There's no logic behind it. It's not convincing. It's simply saying, oh, those poor children who are dead, if only we could talk to them, they would say, change your gun laws, please. Because none of the gun laws that we have in place, and none of the ones that this guy is suggesting, the gun laws that we have in place that already make everything the guy did illegal, didn't stop him from doing what he did at Newtown. And none of the laws that have been suggested since would have stopped it either. But the argument is, we've got to do something. There's no point in doing something if you're not actually going to make things better. Our author finishes with this paragraph. Guns are not sacred. Maybe that's our sin. Many of us have almost come to worship the cold steel of our guns. We would never say it that way, but we often act that way, and how we act says much about what we believe. I don't hate anybody, but I absolutely despise this argument. Safety, peace, in an earthly sense, it's never total. He talks about how freedom in an earthly sense is never total. Well, peace and security and safety in an earthly sense is never total. Why? Because we live in a fallen world, a world corrupted by sin. And this is offensive to me, and it should offend every Christian gun owner, to suggest that because I won't fall for this illogical nonsense that saner gun laws, as he says, because I don't support them, then I must worship my guns. But Mr. Foster, who accuses us of worshiping guns, seems to be worshiping government and man-made laws, because he's putting his trust in those things more than in God. Psalm 146 says, "Put not your trust in princes, in a son of man in whom there is no salvation." And Psalm 118 says, "It's better to take refuge in the Lord than to trust in princes." And it sounds to me that this author trusts in laws made by men more than he trusts in the Lord. All right, that's going to wrap it up for this segment. If you have any questions, if you have any comments, any suggestions, please visit our feedback page at armedlutheran.us/feedback. Send us a message, a question, a voicemail, or send us an email. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to respond to your questions on the air. Pastor Bennett, Lord willing, will be back with us next week. Join us again then for another episode of Clinging to God and Guns right here on Armed Lutheran Radio.
John Bennett is the pastor at St. John's Lutheran Church in Willow Creek, Minnesota. For more information, visit stjohnswillowcreek.org.
And that's going to wrap it up for today's show. Thank you for listening, downloading, and subscribing. Hope you've enjoyed everything that you heard here today. Thank you to our contributors. Love you guys. Thank you for everything that you do. Aaron Israel and Sergeant Bill Silvia, Mia Anstine, and Pastor John Bennett. Lord willing, will be back with us next week. Until then, keep shooting, keep praying. We'll talk to you next time.
you for listening to this episode of Armed Lutheran Radio. For show notes, be sure to visit our website at www.armedlutheran.us. You can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher Radio, and TuneIn. This podcast is made possible by Cook's Holsters and contributions from listeners like you.